How do you even begin to write a single rulebook for a brand new nation, especially one that is so vast, so incredibly diverse, and, on top of all that, born from the fire of a violent partition? Well, that was the staggering challenge facing the framers of India's constitution. Okay, let's dive right in.
You really have to get this contrast to understand the story. On one hand, you have this incredible, soaring hope of independence, perfectly captured in Nehru's famous Tryst with Destiny speech. But at the exact same moment, you have the brutal, devastating reality of partition. This is the tightrope they had to walk. Hope and horror all at once. It really set the stage for one of the greatest political experiments in modern history.
So, to really get this, you have to understand the world they were in. The story of the Indian Constitution doesn't begin in a quiet, scholarly library. It begins in chaos. It begins against a backdrop of violence, division, and just profound uncertainty.
Now, what's just wild about this timeline is how it lays that chaos bare. The Constituent Assembly started its work in December 1946. But look at what was already happening. The country was literally on fire. The Great Calcutta Killings had kicked off a year of non-stop rioting. So think about that. While they're inside, debating legal clauses, the nation is being violently torn apart right outside their doors.
And this was the group tasked with forging unity out of all that chaos, the Constituent Assembly. Now, yeah, it was dominated by the Congress Party, but don't let that fool you for a second. This room was absolutely filled with brilliant minds, with lawyers, scholars, and activists who had fiercely conflicting visions for what India should become.
And yet, somehow, amidst all that violence and all that uncertainty, the framers actually managed to lay out a truly ambitious vision for the new nation. Let's take a look at how they did it.
The heavy hitters in this whole process were people like Jawaharlal Nehru and Vallabhbhai Patel. And it was Nehru who moved this crucial document, the Objectives Resolution. You can think of it as the mission statement, the North Star for the entire constitution-making process.
And this quote from Nehru just nails their whole mindset. He was crystal clear. This wasn't about cutting and pasting from the American or French constitutions. He was basically saying, whatever we build here, it has to fit the Indian people. It has to feel like it's ours. This was going to be a uniquely Indian document, from the ground up.
So what was actually in this resolution? Well, it laid out these massive core principles. First, an independent sovereign republic. Done. Justice, equality, and freedom for every single citizen. And this was critical. Specific safeguards for minorities and what they called backward classes. It aimed to fuse the ideals of a liberal democracy with a promise of economic justice for all. This was their blueprint.
But, as soon as you lay out a blueprint like that, it brings up some really tough questions. And that brings us to the first major debate, which was about something that sounds simple but is incredibly complex. Who exactly are the people of India?
And that led to this one question that just set the assembly on fire. Should minorities have separate political electorates? In other words, should Muslims only vote for Muslim candidates, Sikhs only for Sikh candidates, and so on? This was a system the British had put in place, and now the new India had to decide whether to keep it.
Well, the pushback from nationalists was, to put it mildly, fierce. Sardar Patel didn't mince words. He called separate electorates a poison that the British had deliberately injected into India to divide it. For him and many others, this system was directly responsible for the bloodshed of partition, and to continue it would be an absolute disaster.
And it wasn't just him. Govind Ballabh Pant came at it from a slightly different angle, but he was just as forceful. He argued that this system would be suicidal to the minorities themselves. And why? Because it would permanently isolate them. It would build a political wall around them, guaranteeing they could never become a majority, leaving them feeling frustrated and politically powerless.
But then, a socialist leader named N.G. Ranga gets up and just flips the whole conversation on its head. He basically said, "You're all arguing about the wrong thing." For him, the real minorities weren't defined by religion. They were the masses of this country, the poor, the oppressed, the people so downtrodden that they couldn't even access their basic human rights. He wanted to redefine the entire debate around economics, not religion.
So you can see how these debates about identity and rights lead right into the next big fight, the tension between unity and autonomy. How much power should the central government in Delhi have, and how much should be left to the provinces, the states?
And this side really lays out the two sides of that classic tug-of-war. On one side, you had Team Strong Center, with guys like Nehru and B.R. Ambedkar.
They were haunted by the violence of partition and believed that only a powerful central government could stop the country from flying apart. But on the other side, you had voices like K. Santhanam from the South, warning that a center trying to control everything from Delhi would just be weak and ineffective. He argued that for real progress, the states needed power and, just as importantly, their own money.
So how did they even begin to tackle these enormous clashing ideas? Well, they got organized. Like really organized. They didn't just shout at each other in one big room. They created this amazing system of committees, each chaired by a key figure, to systematically break down these huge questions of power, rights, and governance into manageable pieces.
Okay, now we get to what was maybe the most raw, the most emotional, the most divisive debate of them all, the language question. What would be the language of India?
Before things got really heated, Mahatma Gandhi had championed this beautiful idea of a language called Hindustani. What's so interesting is that Hindustani wasn't pure Hindi or pure Urdu. It was a blend, a mix, the language that ordinary people actually spoke. For Gandhi, it was a perfect living symbol of Hindu-Muslim unity.
But yeah, that spirit of compromise, it did not last. The debate turned incredibly aggressive. A member named R.V. Dulekar stood up and declared that anyone in the assembly who didn't know Hindustani wasn't worthy of being there, and they better leave. I mean, can you just imagine the explosion that set off in the room?
And this sparked genuine fear. G. Durgabai, a member from the South, articulated it perfectly. She said that for non-Hindi speakers, all this aggressive propaganda for Hindi cuts at the very root of the provincial languages. They felt like their own rich cultures and languages were being threatened, like they were about to be erased.
So you've got these intense, often bitter arguments about identity, power, and language. How on earth do they land the plane and actually produce a final document? Well, let's look at what was forged in this fire.
Out of all that conflict, out of all that debate, came something truly, truly revolutionary. Universal adult suffrage. One person, one vote. Now, you have to remember, at a time when even established Western democracies had given the right to vote in slow, painful stages, often excluding women or the poor, India gave it to every single adult citizen, all at once. It was this incredible, massive leap of faith in their own people.
And here it is, the moment it all came together. After 11 sessions, 165 days of actual sittings, spread over nearly 3 long years of intense, exhausting debate, the framers signed the Constitution of India into existence. A single rulebook forged from 1,000 arguments and a multitude of voices.
So in the end, what we have isn't some perfect text handed down from the heavens. It's messy, it's human, it's a hard-won compromise born from some of the most difficult arguments a new nation could possibly have. And that really leaves us with the big question, right? If this vision was forged in the fire of debate, what does it take from all of us today to keep that vision alive?